The dust kicked up around her worn boots as Flora Calloway walked down the main street of Park City, Utah, clutching the last 20 cents she had to her name. Spring of 1883 had arrived with promises of new beginnings, but for Flora, those promises rang as hollow as her empty stomach. Her father had died 6 months ago from consumption, leaving her alone in a world that had little patience for a 21-year-old woman with no family and fewer prospects. She had sold everything they owned just to pay for his medicine and burial, and now the boarding house had turned her out for lack of payment. The sun beat down mercilessly as she paused outside the general store, watching families come and go with their purchases. Children laughed and played while their mothers bargained with the shopkeeper. Flora pulled her faded blue shawl tighter around her shoulders, though the day was warm. It was more habit than necessity, a shield against the world that seemed determined to grind her into nothing. She had tried everything. The laundry refused her because they had enough workers. The hotel said they only hired married women for cleaning, worried that single girls would run off or cause trouble. Even the saloon had turned her away, and Flora was grateful for that at least. Her father had raised her better than that, though she wondered how much longer her principles would hold against the gnawing hunger in her belly. A wagon rumbled past, sending up more dust. Flora coughed and turned away, her eyes scanning the street for any possibility she might have missed. That was when she saw the notice tacked to the post outside the sheriff's office. Her feet carried her toward it before her mind fully registered what she was doing. The handwriting was neat but masculine, the letters formed with obvious care by someone unaccustomed to writing notices. Need help at ranch, must be willing to work hard, fair pay and meals provided. Inquire at Yates Morrison Ranch 5 miles west of town. Flora read it 3 times, her heart pounding harder with each pass. Ranch work. She knew nothing about ranching, but she could learn. She had to learn. The promise of meals alone was enough to make her eyes sting with desperate hope. She asked the sheriff for directions, ignoring his skeptical look when she explained her purpose. The walk took her nearly 2 hours in the afternoon heat, but she barely noticed. Her mind raced with possibilities and fears. What if he had already hired someone? What if he took one look at her and laughed? What if he was the kind of man who preyed on desperate women? That last thought made her pause at the edge of the property. The ranch spread before her, more modest than she had expected but well maintained. A sturdy house sat among several outbuildings, and she could see cattle grazing in the distance. Split rail fences marked the boundaries, and everything spoke of hard work and careful attention. A man emerged from the barn, and Flora's breath caught. Even from this distance, she could see he was tall and broad-shouldered, moving with the confident stride of someone comfortable in his own domain. He was leading a horse, speaking to it in low tones she could not quite hear. Flora forced her feet forward, her hands twisting in the fabric of her skirt. As she drew closer, she could make out more details. He was perhaps 30 years old, with dark hair that needed cutting and a strong jaw shadowed with stubble. His clothes were practical and worn from honest labor, and his hands as he worked with the horse showed both strength and gentleness. He looked up as her footsteps crunched on the gravel, and Flora found herself facing eyes the color of storm clouds. For a moment, neither of them spoke. She saw surprise flash across his face, followed by something that might have been uncertainty. "Can I help you, miss?" His voice was deeper than she expected, roughened by years of calling across open spaces. "I saw your notice, in town, about needing help." The words came out rushed, and Flora forced herself to slow down. "I am looking for work, and I am willing to learn whatever you need me to do." Yates Morrison studied her for a long moment, and Flora felt her cheeks warm under his scrutiny. She knew what he saw. A thin woman in a faded dress, dusty from walking, with dark circles under her eyes from too many sleepless nights worrying about survival. She probably looked like the last person who could handle ranch work. "Ranch work is hard," he said finally, his tone neither unkind nor encouraging. "Long hours, heavy lifting, early mornings and late nights. The cattle do not care if you are tired or if the weather is bad. This is not like working in a store." "I know that." Flora lifted her chin, meeting his gaze directly. "I am not afraid of hard work. My father and I ran a small farm before he got sick. I know how to tend animals and mend fences and work until the job is done. I can cook and clean too, whatever you need. I just need a chance." Something shifted in his expression, a crack in the careful neutrality. "You walked all the way from town?" "Yes, sir. It is a long walk. I have made longer ones." It was not quite true, but close enough. Yates glanced back at the ranch, then at her again. She saw him weighing something in his mind, and she held her breath, praying he would not send her away. If he did, she did not know what she would do next. "When did you last eat?" The question caught her off guard. "I had breakfast." 3 days ago, but he did not need to know that. His eyes narrowed slightly, and Flora suspected he knew she was not being entirely truthful. He tied the horse to a post and gestured toward the house. "Come on, we can talk about this inside." The house was neat and sparse, the home of a man who lived alone and kept things simple. A large table dominated the main room, with a cookstove in one corner and a few chairs scattered about. Everything was clean but impersonal, as if no one had taken the time to make the space truly comfortable. Yates pointed to a chair. "Sit. I will make some coffee." Flora sat, her hands folded in her lap to keep them from shaking. She watched as he moved around the kitchen with practiced efficiency, preparing not just coffee but bread and cold beef and cheese. He set the plate in front of her, and the sight of so much food nearly undid her composure. "Eat," he said simply, pouring 2 cups of coffee. Pride warred with hunger, and hunger won. Flora ate slowly, trying to maintain some dignity even as her body screamed for nourishment. The food was simple but good, and she had to force herself not to wolf it down like an animal. Yates sat across from her, drinking his coffee and saying nothing. She appreciated that he did not watch her eat or make her feel like a charity case, though that was exactly what she was in this moment. When she had finished most of the plate, saving some in case he thought less of her appetite, she looked up to find him studying her with an unreadable expression. "My wife died 2 years ago," he said abruptly. "Fever took her fast. Since then, I have been running this place alone. I hired help when I could, but most do not stay long. The work is too hard, or they find better opportunities, or they just do not care enough to do the job right." Flora absorbed this information, understanding now the loneliness she had sensed about the place. "I am sorry for your loss," he nodded, acknowledging the sentiment but not dwelling on it. "I am not looking for a hand who will work a few weeks and then move on. I need someone reliable, someone who will stay and learn and become a real part of keeping this ranch running. Can you be that person?" "Yes." She did not hesitate. "I have nowhere else to go and nothing to go back to. If you give me this chance, I will work harder than anyone you have ever hired. I swear it. There is a room off the kitchen that you can have. It is small but private. Meals are included, and I will pay you $20 a month to start. If you prove yourself, that will increase. You will work 6 days a week, Sundays off for rest and whatever else you need to do. I expect honesty, hard work, and respect. I will give you the same in return. Do we have an understanding? $20 a month in meals." It was more than Flora had dared hope for. She stood, extending her hand across the table. "We have an understanding, Mr. Morrison." His large hand engulfed hers, warm and calloused, Call me Yates. If we are going to be working together every day, we might as well skip the formalities." "Yates," she repeated, testing the name. "I am Flora Calloway." "Well, Flora Calloway, welcome to the Yates Morrison ranch." He released her hand and stood. "It is too late for you to walk back to town today. You can start tomorrow morning. I will show you the room and give you some time to settle in." The room was indeed small, barely larger than a closet, but it had a real bed with clean sheets, a washstand with a pitcher and basin, and hooks on the wall for clothes. To Flora, who had spent the last week sleeping on a bench outside the church, it looked like paradise. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion she could not quite hide. "You will not regret this." Yates paused in the doorway. "I hope not. I will be honest with you, Flora. I took a chance on you today because I saw something in your eyes that reminded me of myself after my wife died. Desperation, yes, but also determination. Do not make me sorry I trusted that instinct." He left before she could respond, his footsteps heavy on the wooden floor. Flora sat on the bed, running her hand over the rough quilt, and let herself believe, for the first time in months, that maybe things would be all right. The next morning arrived with the crow of a rooster, and Flora woke to pale dawn light filtering through the single window. For a moment, she forgot where she was, then memory returned and with it a surge of determination. She dressed quickly in the same clothes from yesterday, her only clothes, and splashed water on her face from the basin. Yates was already in the kitchen when she emerged, frying eggs and bacon. The smell made her mouth water. "Morning," he said without turning around. "Coffee is ready. Pour yourself a cup and sit. We eat first, then I will show you around and explain what needs doing." They ate in companionable silence, and Flora was grateful he was not the type to chatter aimlessly. She was too nervous to make small talk anyway, her mind already racing ahead to all the tasks she might be expected to perform. After breakfast, Yates led her outside into the cool morning air. The ranch looked different in the daylight, more expansive and well-ordered. He walked her through the property, pointing out the barn where the horses were kept, the chicken coop, the smokehouse, and the various pens and pastures. "I have about 200 head of cattle right now," he explained as they walked. "Not a huge operation, but enough to keep me busy. Spring is calving season, so we will need to check on the herd regularly, help any mothers having trouble, and make sure the calves are all tagged and accounted for." Flora nodded, absorbing every word. "What do you need me to do?" "For today, start with the chickens. Feed them, collect the eggs, and clean out the coop. It needs it badly. I have been putting it off. Then I need you to work on mending some tack in the barn. The leather is cracking in places and needs oiling and stitching. Can you sew?" "Yes. My mother taught me before she passed." "Good. After that, we will see about preparing lunch, and then I will take you out to check on the cattle so you can start learning what to look for." The work was indeed hard, but Flora threw herself into it with single-minded focus. The chickens were cantankerous, and the coop was worse than she expected, but she cleaned it thoroughly, trying not to gag at the smell. The mending was easier, almost soothing, and she found herself enjoying the careful work of repairing the worn leather. Yates checked on her periodically, but mostly left her to work independently. She appreciated that he trusted her to complete tasks without constant supervision. It made her feel less like a servant and more like a partner, even if that partnership was purely professional. Lunch was simple fare that Flora prepared from the supplies in the kitchen: beans and cornbread with dried apples. Yates ate with clear appetite and thanked her for the meal, which warmed something inside her chest. That afternoon, they rode out to check the cattle. Yates had saddled 2 horses, and Flora was relieved to find she remembered how to ride despite the years since she had been on horseback. The gelding he gave her was placid and patient, and she silently thanked him for not testing her with a difficult mount on her first day. The open range stretched before them, brown and green under the wide blue sky. Flora breathed deeply, tasting dust and grass and freedom. For the first time since her father died, she felt something like peace settle over her. Yates rode beside her, pointing out various things she needed to learn. Which cows were close to calving, which areas had the best grazing, where the water sources were located. He spoke easily, his earlier reserve melting away as he discussed his work. Flora could hear the passion in his voice, the deep connection he had to this land and these animals. "You really love this," she said without thinking. He glanced at her, surprise flickering across his face. "I do. This ranch was my dream, mine and Sarah's. We built it from nothing, just a piece of land and a lot of hope. After she died, I thought about giving up, selling it all and moving on. But I could not do it. This place, it is all I have left of those dreams." The raw honesty in his words made Flora's throat tighten. She would be proud of you for keeping it going. Maybe, or maybe she would be angry that I let myself become so isolated. He shook his head. "I have not been to town for anything but supplies in over a year, have not talked to anyone more than necessary. I know people think I am strange, the hermit rancher who cannot get over his dead wife." "Grief is not something you get over," Flora said quietly. "It is something you learn to carry." Yates looked at her sharply, and she met his gaze without flinching. "You have lost people too. My mother when I was 12. My father 6 months ago. I know what it is like to feel like the only person left in the world." They rode in silence for a while, but it was a different kind of silence now. Something had shifted between them, a recognition of shared pain and survival. Flora felt less like an employee and more like someone who understood, and maybe that was worth more than any wage. The days fell into a rhythm. Flora rose before dawn, helped prepare breakfast, and then set about whatever tasks Yates had outlined for the day. She fed animals, mended fences, hauled water, cleaned stalls, and learned to recognize the signs of trouble in the cattle. Her hands grew rough and calloused, her back ached constantly, and she fell into bed each night too exhausted to dream. But she also grew stronger. Her appetite returned in full force, and Yates made sure she had plenty to eat. The hollows in her cheeks began to fill out, and color returned to her skin from working in the sun. She felt more alive than she had in years, her body remembering what it was to be young and capable. Yates proved to be a fair employer and, gradually, something close to a friend. He taught her everything patiently, never making her feel stupid for not knowing things. When she made mistakes, he corrected her without anger. When she succeeded, he offered quiet praise that meant more than effusive compliments would have. They talked while they worked, small conversations at first, then deeper ones. He told her about growing up in Missouri, about coming west to make his fortune, about meeting Sarah at a church social and knowing immediately she was the one. Flora told him about her childhood, her father's farm, the slow descent into poverty after her mother died and her father could not manage alone. "I tried so hard to keep us afloat," she said one evening as they sat on the porch after dinner, watching the sun set over the mountains. "I took in sewing, sold eggs, did whatever I could, but it was never enough. When he got sick, I had to choose between food and medicine. I chose medicine, but it did not matter in the end. He died anyway, and I was left with nothing." Yates was quiet for a moment. "You did your best. That is all anyone can do. Sometimes your best is not good enough. Sometimes the world is just cruel and there is nothing you can do about it except survive." He stood, stretching. "But you did survive, Flora. You are still here, still fighting. That takes more strength than most people have." She looked up at him, silhouetted against the orange sky, and felt something flutter in her chest that she quickly pushed down. This was her employer, nothing more. She could not afford to confuse gratitude with anything else, but as the weeks passed, that became harder to do. Flora found herself watching Yates when he did not know she was looking, admiring the way he moved, the gentleness in his hands when he treated an injured animal, the rare smile that transformed his serious face. She told herself it was natural to appreciate someone who had saved her from destitution, but her heart knew the difference. One morning in late April, Flora was working in the garden she had started behind the house when she heard hoofbeats approaching fast. She straightened, shading her eyes against the sun, and saw Yates riding hard toward the house. Fear spiked through her. Something was wrong. He pulled up in a spray of gravel and dismounted before his horse had fully stopped. "Flora, I need your help. One of the cows is having trouble calving. I cannot do this alone." She dropped her hoe and ran for the barn where he kept the medical supplies. They rode out together, and Flora's mind raced through everything Yates had taught her about assisting with difficult births. She had watched him do it twice before, but she had never been the one to help directly. The cow was in distress, her sides heaving and eyes rolling. Yates dismounted and approached carefully, speaking in low, soothing tones. "Easy, girl. We are going to help you." What followed was messy, exhausting, and utterly terrifying. Flora followed Yates's instructions exactly, holding the cow steady, providing the tools he needed, helping him guide the calf into the world. Her arms ached, her dress was ruined, and she was fairly certain she would never get the smell out of her hair. But then the calf was there, slick and struggling, and the mother was lowing and trying to stand and clean her baby. Flora sat back in the grass, breathing hard, and felt tears streaming down her face. Yates looked at her with concern. "Are you all right?" "Yes," she managed, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I am fine. We did it. We saved them." A smile broke across his face, genuine and unguarded, and Flora's heart stopped. He looked years younger, the weight of grief and loneliness lifted for just a moment. "We did. You did great, Flora. I could not have managed without you." He reached out and squeezed her shoulder, and the warmth of his hand seemed to burn through her dress. Flora was acutely aware of how close they were sitting, both of them covered in mud and worse, and how something had changed between them in the last hour. They rode back to the ranch in the golden afternoon light, and Flora realized she was happier than she had been in years. Not just grateful for food and shelter, but genuinely happy. This place, this work, this man beside her, it all felt right in a way nothing else ever had. That night, after she had bathed and changed into her nightgown, Flora lay in bed and let herself admit the truth. She was falling in love with Yates Morrison. It was foolish and complicated and probably hopeless, but there it was. The knowledge settled over her like a blanket, terrifying and comforting all at once. She did not know if he could ever see her as anything other than his employee, someone he had helped out of pity. He was still grieving his wife, still carrying that loss like an open wound. But Flora had learned that hope was a stubborn thing, refusing to die even when logic said it should. The next morning, Yates asked Flora to accompany him into town for supplies. It was her first trip back to Park City since she had arrived at the ranch 6 weeks earlier, and she was surprised by how much had changed in that short time. The town that had seemed so cold and unwelcoming now looked smaller and less threatening. Flora held her head high as they walked down the main street, very aware of the curious looks they received. She knew what people were thinking, what they were assuming about the rancher and the young woman working for him. Let them think what they wanted. She had nothing to be ashamed of. They split up to handle different errands, agreeing to meet back at the general store in an hour. Flora went to the fabric shop, needing to purchase material for a new dress since her old one had been destroyed during the calving. She was examining a bolt of blue cotton when she heard a familiar voice behind her. Flora Calloway. Is that really you? She turned to find Mrs. Henderson, one of the women who had refused to hire her for laundry work. The older woman's eyes widened as she took in Flora's appearance. My goodness, you look so different, healthy. I had heard you found work out at the Morrison place. Yes, madam, I have been working there since March. Working. Mrs. Henderson's tone made it clear what she thought Flora was really doing. I see. Well, I suppose everyone does what they must to survive. Anger flared hot in Flora's chest. I am ranching, Mrs. Henderson. Real work. The kind that leaves you too tired at the end of the day to worry about what small-minded people are saying about you. She turned back to the fabric, dismissing the older woman, and was surprised when Mrs. Henderson did not leave immediately. I owe you an apology, the woman said quietly. I should have given you a chance when you came asking for work. I was afraid, worried about what people would say if I hired a young woman with no family. But that was not fair to you. Flora looked at her, seeing genuine regret in her face. No, it was not, but I understand fear. We all do what we think we have to do. You have grown up, Flora. More than I would have thought possible in such a short time. After Mrs. Henderson left, Flora selected her fabric and paid for it with money from her first wages. The coins felt solid and real in her hand, proof that she had earned her place in the world. She was still admiring her purchase when Yates appeared at her elbow. Ready to go. He was carrying 2 large sacks of supplies, and Flora rushed to help him. Let me take one of those. I have them. You just had to carry feed sacks all morning yesterday. My turn. They loaded the wagon and started the journey back to the ranch. Flora was quiet, thinking about Mrs. Henderson's words and the looks they had received in town. Something bothering you? Yates asked. People are talking about us, about me working for you. Let them talk. People always need something to gossip about. Does it not bother you what they are saying? He was quiet for a moment. What are they saying exactly? Flora felt her cheeks heat. That I am not really working, that I am there for other reasons. Ah, his jaw tightened. And does it bother you what they think? I know it is not true. That is what matters. Flora. He pulled the wagon to a stop, turning to face her fully. I hired you because you needed work and I needed help. That is the truth. But I would be lying if I said that was the only reason I wanted you to stay. Her heart began to pound. What do you mean? I mean that these past 6 weeks, you have brought something back to that ranch that has been missing for a long time. Life. Purpose. I find myself looking forward to each day instead of just enduring it, and I know that is because of you. Flora could hardly breathe. Yates, I do not understand what you are saying. He ran a hand through his hair, clearly frustrated with himself. I am saying this badly. What I am trying to say is that somewhere along the way, you stopped being just my employee. You became my friend. And now, I think you are becoming something more, and I do not know what to do about it because I never thought I would feel this way about anyone again. The words hung in the air between them, fragile and precious. Flora reached out slowly and took his hand, feeling the calluses and warmth of it. I feel it too. I have been trying not to, but I do. Yates looked at their joined hands, then back at her face. This is complicated. Yes. People will talk even more. I do not care. I am 11 years older than you. That does not matter to me. I am still grieving Sarah. Part of me always will be. Flora squeezed his hand. I would not expect anything else. She was your wife. You loved her. But Yates, you are still alive. You are allowed to move forward, to feel something for someone else. That is not betraying her memory. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. The gesture was so tender it made her eyes sting. You are remarkable, Flora Calloway. Do you know that? I am just a woman trying to make her way in the world. No, you are brave and strong and kind, and you make me want to be better than I have been. You make me want to hope again. They sat there on the wagon seat, hands joined, and Flora felt the world shift around them. This was the beginning of something, she knew. Something that would change both their lives irrevocably. When they finally continued home, everything looked different. The ranch that had been her workplace was now something more. A home. A future. A place where love could grow despite grief and hardship, and the harsh judgment of the world. The summer months passed in a blur of work and stolen moments. Yates and Flora were cautious at first, neither wanting to rush into something they might regret. But their feelings only deepened with time, growing stronger and more certain with each passing day. They worked side by side from dawn to dusk, their movements synchronized from weeks of practice. Flora learned to anticipate what Yates needed before he asked, and he came to rely on her judgment as much as his own. The ranch prospered under their combined efforts, the cattle healthy and the property well maintained. But it was the quiet moments Flora treasured most. Evenings on the porch after dinner, talking about everything and nothing. Sunday afternoons spent riding through the mountains, exploring places Yates had not visited in years. The way he would brush her hand as they worked, a silent acknowledgement of what was building between them. In July, Yates kissed her for the first time. They were in the barn, working on repairing a broken stall door, and Flora had been laughing at something he said. He had stopped mid-sentence, looking at her with such intensity that her laughter died. "What?" she asked, suddenly nervous. "You are beautiful when you laugh. You are beautiful all the time, but especially then." Before she could respond, he had stepped close and cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently stroking her cheeks. He gave her time to pull away, but Flora leaned in instead, closing the distance between them. The kiss was gentle and sweet, filled with all the tenderness that had been growing between them for months. When they finally parted, Flora rested her forehead against his chest, feeling his heart thundering beneath her ear. "I love you," Yates said simply. "I did not think I could love anyone again, but I love you, Flora. I love you too." The words came easily, naturally, because they were true. She had loved him for months but had been afraid to say it, afraid he was not ready to hear it. After that, the ranch felt truly like home. They were still careful about propriety, Flora keeping her room and them maintaining separate spaces. But everyone in town knew by now that something had developed between the rancher and his hired help, and the gossip ranged from approving to scandalous. Yates handled it by ignoring it completely. "Let them talk," he said when Flora worried about his reputation. "I know the truth." "You know the truth. That is all that matters." In late August, Yates took Flora to visit Sarah's grave for the first time. It was on a hillside overlooking the ranch, marked by a simple wooden cross that Yates had carved himself. Flora stood back respectfully while he knelt and cleared away the weeds that had grown up around the marker. "I brought someone to meet you, Sarah," he said quietly. "Her name is Flora, and she is extraordinary. She saved this ranch and she saved me, though I did not know I needed saving. I hope you would approve. I think you would like her." Flora felt tears slip down her cheeks. There was something profoundly moving about watching Yates talk to his late wife, introducing her as if she were still there to meet. It spoke to the depth of his love, his loyalty, and his honesty. When he stood and returned to her side, she took his hand. "Thank you for bringing me here. I needed you to understand that you are not replacing her. You are not a substitute. What I feel for you is different, but just as real, just as important. I understand. And I am honored that you love me enough to share this with me." They walked back to the ranch hand in hand, and Flora felt as if something had been settled, some final barrier crossed. This was real. They were building a life together, even if they had not yet made it official. In September, Yates proposed. It was not a grand gesture or a dramatic moment. They were sitting on the porch as the sun set, tired from a long day of preparing for winter, when he said, "Marry me, Flora." She looked at him, certain she had misheard. "What, marry me?" "I know I am not much of a catch, just a rancher with more land than money and too many memories. But I love you, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I want to make this official, make you my wife in truth. So, Flora Calloway, will you marry me?" Flora felt joy bubble up inside her, so intense it was almost painful. "Yes, yes, of course I will marry you." He pulled a ring from his pocket, a simple gold band that looked old. "This was my grandmother's. Sarah never wore it because it was too big for her, but I think it will fit you." The ring slid onto Flora's finger perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her all along. She stared at it, this tangible symbol of promises and future, and could hardly believe her good fortune. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Park City. The ceremony was simple, attended by a handful of people from town who had come to respect Flora's determination and Yates's integrity. Mrs. Henderson came, offering quiet congratulations and a beautifully embroidered tablecloth as a wedding gift. The sheriff was there, along with the general store owner and his wife, and a few neighboring ranchers Yates had known for years. Flora wore a new dress she had sewn herself from cream-colored cotton, and Yates wore his best suit, looking handsome and nervous. When the preacher asked if they took each other as husband and wife, their voices were strong and certain. "I do. I do." The kiss that sealed their vows was chaste and appropriate for church, but the love behind it was clear to everyone watching. Flora was now Flora Morrison, wife of Yates Morrison, and the title filled her with pride and happiness. They held a small reception at the ranch, and Flora was touched by how many people came bearing gifts and well wishes. Even those who had gossiped seemed genuinely happy for them, won over by the obvious devotion between the newlyweds. As the last guests departed and the sun began to set, Yates took Flora's hand and led her to the porch. "Mrs. Morrison," he said, testing out the name, "how does it feel?" "Perfect," she answered honestly. "Everything feels perfect." That night, they shared a bed for the first time as husband and wife, and Flora discovered that physical intimacy with someone you loved was nothing like the clinical descriptions she had heard whispered among married women. It was tender and passionate and sometimes awkward, but always filled with love and trust. Afterward, lying in Yates's arms with her head on his chest, Flora felt completely at peace. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For giving me work when I had nothing. For seeing past my desperation to the person I could be. For loving me." He kissed the top of her head. "Thank you for giving me reasons to hope again. For reminding me what it means to be alive. For choosing me." The first winter as a married couple was hard but fulfilling. Snow came early and deep, blanketing the ranch in white and making every task twice as difficult. They worked together to keep the cattle fed and safe, to maintain the buildings against the cold, to ensure they had enough supplies to last until spring. But the hardships brought them closer. Flora learned to read Yates's moods, to know when he needed quiet companionship and when he needed to talk. Yates learned Flora's strengths and fears, her quirks and preferences. They built routines and rituals, small things that made their house a home. Flora proved to be an excellent ranch wife, capable and resilient. She could shoot well enough to bring down small game for dinner, could treat minor injuries in both animals and people, and kept the household running smoothly. Yates had never seen the ranch in better shape, and he told her so often. In March of 1884, exactly 1 year after Flora had first arrived at the ranch, she realized she had not had her monthly courses in some time. At first, she thought it was just the stress of winter, but as the weeks passed and other symptoms appeared, she began to suspect the truth. She told Yates one evening after dinner, shy and nervous about how he would react. They had not discussed children, though she hoped he wanted them someday. "Yates, I think I might be with child." He dropped the cup he was holding and it clattered against the table. For a moment he just stared at her, his face unreadable. Then a slow smile spread across his features, transforming him. "Are you certain?" "Not completely, but fairly certain." "All the signs are there." He crossed the room in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "A baby! We are going to have a baby!" Flora heard the wonder and joy in his voice, but also something else. Fear. She pulled back enough to see his face. "What is wrong?" "Sarah died in childbirth," he said quietly. "The baby too, a girl. We never even got to name her before she was gone. I have never told anyone that before, not even you. It was too painful to talk about." Flora's heart broke for him, for the double loss he had endured. She took his face in her hands, making him look at her. "I am not Sarah. This is not the same situation. Women have babies every day and survive just fine. I know, but the thought of losing you, Flora, I could not bear it. You will not lose me. I am strong and healthy, and we will find a midwife to help when the time comes. Everything will be all right." He kissed her fiercely, desperately, and she understood the fear that drove him. But beneath the fear was joy, and she clung to that. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Flora was tired constantly during the early months. Yates fussed over her incessantly, trying to keep her from doing heavy work until she finally snapped at him that she was pregnant, not made of glass. "I need to keep working," she insisted. "I will go mad if you make me sit around all day." They compromised. Flora continued to do most of her usual tasks, but let Yates handle the heaviest lifting and the work that required climbing or awkward positions. It chafed at her pride sometimes, but she knew he needed to feel like he was protecting her. In the summer, as her belly swelled with their child, Yates hired a young man named Thomas to help with the ranch work. He was 17, eager to learn and respectful of both of them. Flora was grateful for the extra help, especially as movement became more difficult. She spent her evenings sewing baby clothes and blankets, preparing for the arrival. Yates built a cradle from oak, carving it carefully and sanding it smooth. They talked about names, about hopes for their child, about the future they were building together. "Boy or girl, I do not care," Yates said one night, his hand resting on Flora's belly. "As long as you are both healthy, that is all I want." Flora covered his hand with hers. "We will be. I promise you, we will be." In November, as the first snow began to fall, Flora went into labor. Yates sent Thomas racing to town to fetch the midwife while he stayed with Flora, holding her hand and trying not to show his terror. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next morning. The midwife was calm and competent, guiding Flora through the process while Yates paced and prayed. Flora had never experienced such pain, but she focused on the reward at the end, the child she and Yates had made together. Finally, as the sun rose over the mountains, a baby's cry filled the room. "It is a boy," the midwife announced, placing the squalling infant on Flora's chest. A healthy, strong boy. Flora looked down at her son, his face red and wrinkled and perfect, and felt love so intense it took her breath away. Yates appeared at her side, tears streaming down his face as he stared at their child. "A son," he whispered. "We have a son. What should we name him?" Flora asked, exhausted but happy. "What about Samuel, after my father, Samuel Morrison?" Flora tested the name and smiled. It is perfect. Yates kissed her forehead, then carefully touched the baby's tiny hand. Thank you, Flora. Thank you for giving me this, for surviving, for being here. Always, she promised. I will always be here. The first months of parenthood were exhausting and wonderful. Samuel was a good baby, healthy and strong, though he had his father's lungs when it came to crying. Flora and Yates took turns walking him at night, soothing him back to sleep, marveling at this tiny person they had created. The ranch continued to thrive despite the demands of a new baby. Thomas proved himself reliable and was given more responsibility. Yates talked about expanding the operation, buying more land, building up the herd. Flora listened to his plans and offered her own ideas, their partnership extending to every aspect of their lives. On a cold December evening, with Samuel sleeping in his cradle and a fire crackling in the hearth, Flora sat beside Yates on the sofa they had recently purchased. It was the first piece of furniture they had bought together, something comfortable and meant for a growing family. "Do you ever think about how different things might have been?" she asked quietly. "What do you mean?" "If you had not posted that notice, if I had not seen it, if you had turned me away that first day, we would not be here now. None of this would exist." Yates pulled her closer, and she rested her head on his shoulder. "I think about it sometimes. How close I came to not posting the notice at all, to just struggling on alone because I was too proud or too scared to admit I needed help. And then I think about you walking all that way from town, so thin and desperate but trying so hard to be brave. I am glad I trusted my instinct that day. So am I. You saved my life, Yates, in every way a person can be saved. You saved mine too. I was drowning in grief and loneliness, and I did not even realize it. You brought me back to life, Flora. You gave me reasons to hope again, to believe the future could be better than just surviving. You gave me everything." She lifted her face to kiss him, slow and sweet. "We gave each other everything. That is what love does." Samuel stirred in his cradle, making small noises that would soon become full-fledged crying if they did not attend to him. Yates stood to get him, lifting their son with practiced ease. "Hey there, little man. What is all the fuss about?" Flora watched her husband sway gently, patting their baby's back, and felt her heart swell with contentment. This was her life now. A good man, a beautiful son, a home she had helped build with her own hands. It was more than she had ever dreamed possible in those dark days after her father died. The years passed in a blur of seasons and growth. Samuel grew into a sturdy toddler with his father's dark hair and his mother's determination. In 1886, Flora gave birth to a daughter they named Rose, delicate and sweet-tempered. 2 years after that came another son, Henry, loud and energetic from the moment he was born. The ranch expanded as Yates had planned, and the Morrison name became well respected throughout the territory. They were known for their quality cattle and their fair dealings, but also for their strong partnership. Everyone in Park City knew that Flora was as much a part of the ranch's success as Yates, and that knowledge filled her with pride. Thomas eventually left to start his own ranch, and they hired other help over the years, but Flora and Yates remained the heart of the operation. They worked together, planned together, and built a legacy together that they would pass on to their children. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Yates surprised Flora by taking her back to the spot where he had first kissed her, in the barn by the repaired stall door. The barn had been rebuilt since then, but the place still held meaning for both of them. 10 years, he said, taking her hands in his. It feels like forever and like yesterday all at once. I know what you mean. I can hardly remember what it was like before this life we built together. Do you have any regrets? Flora pretended to think about it, then smiled. Not a single one. You. Only that I did not find you sooner, that we could not have had more time together. He kissed her softly. I love you, Flora Morrison, more today than the day I married you, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today. That is my line, she teased, but her eyes were bright with tears. I love you too. Thank you for taking a chance on a desperate woman who showed up on your doorstep with nothing but hope. Thank you for seeing past a bitter, lonely man to the person he could be again. Thank you for every day, every moment, everything. They stood there in the barn, holding each other, and Flora thought about all they had overcome to reach this point. The grief and loss that had shaped them both. The hard work and determination that had built their home. The love that had grown between them, starting small and uncertain but becoming the foundation of everything. From the house, they heard their children calling for them. Samuel's voice, cracking as he entered adolescence, asking where his parents had gone. Rose's laughter at something Henry had done, the sounds of family, of life, of future. We should get back, Flora said reluctantly. In a minute. Yates kissed her again, deeper this time. Let me have you to myself just a little longer. So they stayed there, wrapped in each other's arms, grateful for every twist of fate that had brought them together. A lonely rancher who had needed help and been brave enough to ask for it. A desperate woman who had needed work and been determined enough to take a chance. Two wounded souls who had found healing in each other. The sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the Morrison ranch settled into evening peace. Flora and Yates finally walked back to the house hand in hand, ready to return to the beautiful chaos of family dinner and children's bedtime, and all the mundane, precious moments that made up a life well lived. In the years that followed, they faced the challenges that came to all families. Droughts that tested the ranch's resources, winters that seemed endless, market fluctuations that made money tight, but they faced everything together, their partnership strong enough to weather any storm. Samuel grew into a young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did, already showing the wisdom and work ethic that would make him an excellent rancher someday. Rose developed her mother's practical skills and her father's gentle nature, beloved by everyone who met her. Henry was wild and adventurous, keeping his parents on their toes but bringing joy and laughter to everything he did. Flora watched her children grow and felt nothing but gratitude. Every meal they shared, every evening on the porch, every challenge they overcame, it was all part of the tapestry of their lives. She had come to this ranch with nothing, and Yates had given her work when times were hard. But what they had built together was so much more than employment or charity. He had given her a place to belong, a purpose, a future. And she had given him reasons to hope again, to believe in love and possibility despite his losses. Together, they had created something beautiful and lasting. One spring morning, Flora walked out to Sarah's grave alone. She did this occasionally, feeling it was important to acknowledge the woman whose death had shaped so much of Yates's life. She knelt by the marker and cleared away the winter debris, tidying the space with gentle hands. "I hope you do not mind me being here," she said quietly, though she felt a bit foolish talking to someone long dead. "I wanted to thank you for loving Yates, for teaching him what a good marriage could be. Everything he learned from you, he brought to us. He is a wonderful husband and father, and I know that is partly because of the time he had with you." The wind rustled through the grass, and a bird sang nearby. Flora felt a sense of peace settle over her, as if she had been given some kind of blessing. "I also wanted to tell you that I will take care of him. I will love him and support him and stand by him for as long as I live. And I will make sure your memory is honored, that he never forgets the happiness you shared. You will always be a part of this family, in the stories we tell and the love we share." She stood, brushing off her skirt, and looked out over the ranch spread below. Their ranch. The place where love had taken root and flourished despite everything. Yates was waiting for her when she returned, leaning against the porch railing with that patient stance she knew so well. "Everything all right. Everything is perfect," she said, meaning it completely. "I was just paying my respects." He pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "You are an extraordinary woman, Flora Morrison. I am just a woman who was given a chance when she needed one most, and who chose to make the most of it. You were always extraordinary. I just had the good sense to recognize it." Their children came pouring out of the house, full of questions and energy and the boundless enthusiasm of youth. Samuel wanted to know if they could ride out to check the north pasture. Rose needed help with the dress she was sewing. Henry had found a lizard and wanted everyone to admire it immediately. Flora and Yates exchanged amused glances over their children's heads, the look of two people who understood each other perfectly. Then they dove into the beautiful chaos of family life, meeting each demand with patience and love. As the seasons continued to turn and the years accumulated, Flora and Yates grew old together. Gray appeared in their hair, lines formed around their eyes, and their bodies moved a little slower than they once had. But the love between them never diminished. If anything, it grew deeper, richer, tempered by time and trial into something unbreakable. They watched Samuel marry and bring his own wife to the ranch, expanding the family and ensuring the Morrison legacy would continue. Rose found love with a kind schoolteacher from town, and they built a life that balanced family and education. Henry eventually headed west to seek his fortune, writing letters full of adventure that kept them laughing and worrying in equal measure. In their later years, Flora and Yates spent more time on the porch, watching the ranch they had built together continue to thrive under Samuel's management. They held hands and talked about the past, about all they had survived and achieved, about the family they had raised. "Do you remember that first day?" Yates asked one evening, his voice rougher with age but still warm. "When you walked up that road, so thin and scared but pretending to be brave. I remember thinking you were going to turn me away. That you would take one look at me and see someone too weak to be useful." Flora squeezed his hand. "I have never been so glad to be wrong about something. I almost did turn you away. I was afraid of letting someone new into my life, afraid of taking responsibility for another person. But something in your eyes stopped me. I saw determination there and strength, and I thought maybe we could help each other. We did. We helped each other and built something beautiful in the process." Yates lifted her hand to his lips, kissing it with the same tenderness he had shown 40 years earlier on a wagon seat outside Park City. "I love you, Flora, every day for the rest of my life. And I love you, always." They sat there as the sun set over their land, over the life they had created together, and felt nothing but gratitude. A lonely rancher had given her work when times were hard, offering hope when she had none. She had given him reasons to hope again, bringing light back into his darkness. Together, they had built a love that would endure long after they were gone, living on in their children and grandchildren, in the ranch that bore their name, in the stories that would be told for generations. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Flora rested her head on Yates's shoulder, exactly where it belonged. This was what happiness looked like. Not a single perfect moment, but a lifetime of moments strung together like pearls, each one precious because they had been shared. The door opened, and their granddaughter appeared, Samuel's youngest child with her bright eyes and wild curls. "Grandma, Grandpa, are you coming in for dinner?" "In a minute, sweetheart," Flora said. "We are just enjoying the view." "It is the same view you see every day," the girl said with the logic of youth. "I know," Yates replied, smiling, "and we never get tired of it. The child shrugged and disappeared back inside, leaving them alone again. Flora thought about those words, about how true they were. The same view every day, the same person beside her, the same life they had built together. And she had never once grown tired of it. That was the real miracle, she thought. Not that they had found each other against all odds, though that was remarkable enough. But that after decades of daily life, of routine and repetition, of seeing each other at their best and worst, they still chose each other every single day. Eventually, they did go inside to join their family for dinner. The table was crowded with children and grandchildren, loud with conversation and laughter. Flora looked around at all the faces, some familiar and some new, all connected to her and Yates by bonds of blood and love. This was what they had built. Not just a ranch or a business, but a family. A legacy of love and hard work and determination. It had started with a desperate woman and a lonely man, both of them broken in different ways, both of them needing something they could not articulate. She had needed safety and purpose. He had needed companionship and hope. Together, they had found all of that and so much more. After dinner, after the dishes were washed and the grandchildren were tucked into bed, Flora and Yates returned to their own room. It was the same room they had shared for 40 years, filled with memories and comfort. Yates helped Flora with the buttons on her dress that her arthritic fingers struggled with, and she helped him with his boots. They moved with the ease of long practice, these small acts of service that made up a marriage. When they finally settled into bed, Yates pulled Flora close and she fit against his side as perfectly as she always had. "Thank you," he said into the darkness. "For what? For everything. For walking up that road 40 years ago, for staying, for loving me, for building this life with me, for giving me more than I ever dreamed I could have again." Flora felt tears prick her eyes. Even after all these years, he could still move her with his words. "Thank you for seeing me, not just the desperate woman who needed help, but the person I was underneath. Thank you for giving me a chance to prove myself. Thank you for loving me." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, grateful for every day they had been given together. And in the morning, they would wake and do it all again, continuing the beautiful routine that had become their life. Years later, when Flora was 75 and Yates was 86, he fell ill with pneumonia. Despite the doctor's best efforts, despite Flora's constant care, despite the prayers of their family, they knew the end was near. Flora sat beside his bed, holding his hand, just as she had held it so many times over the decades. "You are not allowed to leave me," she said, trying to keep her voice light even as fear clutched at her heart. "We have a deal, remember? We are supposed to grow old together." Yates smiled, though it cost him effort. "We did grow old together. We had 46 years, Flora. That is more than most people get. It is not enough. It will never be enough. I know." He squeezed her hand weakly. "But I need you to be strong. For the children and grandchildren, they are going to need you. I do not know how to be without you. You are the strongest person I have ever known. You survived poverty and loss before we ever met. You will survive this too." He paused, breathing hard. "Promise me something, anything. Do not stop living when I am gone. Keep working on the ranch if it makes you happy. Spend time with the family. Find joy wherever you can. Live, Flora, for both of us." She wanted to argue, to tell him she could not possibly continue without him, but she knew what he needed to hear. "I promise." "That is my girl." His eyes drifted closed. "I love you. From that first day to this last day, I have loved you. I love you too. So much it hurts." Yates passed away peacefully that night, surrounded by his family, with Flora holding his hand until the very end. The grief was crushing, overwhelming, worse than anything she had experienced before. This was different from losing her parents. Yates had been her partner, her best friend, her greatest love. He was woven into every part of her life, and his absence left a hole nothing could fill. But Flora kept her promise. She continued to live, to work, to find moments of joy even in her sorrow. She spent time with her children and grandchildren, sharing stories about Yates and keeping his memory alive. She walked to his grave often, laid beside Sarah's now, and talked to him about everything she was doing. The ranch continued to prosper under Samuel's management, and Flora took pride in watching her son carry on the legacy she and Yates had built. Rose visited frequently with her family, and even Henry made the journey back from California once a year. Flora lived for another 7 years without Yates, long enough to see great-grandchildren born, long enough to know that everything they had built would endure. And when she finally passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 82, surrounded by family, her last thought was of a desperate woman walking up a dusty road toward an uncertain future, and the lonely rancher who had given her a chance. They buried her beside Yates, and the whole town of Park City turned out for the funeral. People spoke of her strength, her kindness, her determination. They told stories of how she had transformed the Morrison Ranch from a one-man operation to a family legacy. They talked about the love between her and Yates, a love that had inspired everyone who witnessed it. But perhaps the truest testament to Flora's life came from Samuel, speaking at her graveside with tears streaming down his weathered face. "My mother taught us that hope is not something you wait for. It is something you create with your own hands, through hard work and determination and love. She came to this ranch with nothing, and she left us with everything. A home, a legacy, and the knowledge that no matter how hard life gets, there is always a reason to keep fighting, to keep hoping, to keep loving. She gave my father reasons to hope again when he thought hope was lost forever, and she gave all of us the same gift. We will miss her every day, but we will honor her by living the way she did, with courage and love and unshakable determination." The family gathered together after the funeral, filling the ranch house with the sounds of life and memory. They told stories late into the night, laughing and crying, remembering the woman who had held them all together. And they made promises to continue what she and Yates had started, to keep the Morrison Ranch thriving for generations to come. In the years that followed, the story of Flora and Yates became something of a legend in Park City. People told it to their children as an example of how love could flourish even in the hardest circumstances, how two broken people could come together and create something beautiful. The ranch continued to prosper, passed down through the Morrison family, each generation adding their own chapter to the story. But if you had asked Flora in those last peaceful moments before she died what she considered the greatest achievement of her life, she would not have mentioned the ranch or the business success or even her children, though she loved them dearly. She would have talked about that first day, about gathering every ounce of courage she had to walk 5 miles in the heat to ask a stranger for help, about the way Yates had looked at her, really looked at her, and seen potential instead of just desperation, about how he had given her not just work, but dignity and purpose and eventually love. She would have talked about building a life with someone, brick by brick, day by day, through hard work and shared dreams and unwavering commitment, about learning that love was not just a feeling but a choice you made every single morning. Most of all, she would have talked about hope. How Yates gave it to her when she had none left. How she gave it back to him when grief had stolen his. How they gave it to their children and grandchildren, teaching them that no matter how dark things seemed, there was always a reason to believe tomorrow could be better. That was the real story. Not just of a lonely rancher and a desperate woman, but of two people who found each other at exactly the right moment and built something that would last far beyond their own lives. It was a story of second chances and hard-earned happiness, of love that grew stronger with time rather than fading. And if those who loved them remembered nothing else, they remembered this. Flora Calloway Morrison and Yates Morrison had loved each other with everything they had, through good times and bad, from that first uncertain day to their last peaceful moments. They had built a legacy not of money or property, but of love and hope, and the unshakable belief that even broken people could find healing in each other's arms. That legacy lived on in every child and grandchild who bore the Morrison name, in every person who heard their story and found courage to keep fighting for their own dreams, in the ranch itself that still stood strong and proud against the Utah mountains. It was a legacy that proved love could conquer even the hardest circumstances, that hope was always worth holding on to, and that sometimes the best things in life came from the most desperate moments. The Morrison Ranch still stands today, run by descendants of Flora and Yates, who honor their memory by continuing the traditions they established so many years ago. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun sets over the mountains, people say you can still feel their presence there, in the wind that whispers through the grass, and the peace that settles over the land like a blessing. It is a reminder that love like theirs never truly dies. It lives on in the lives they touched, the family they raised, and the hope they gave to everyone who knew them. A lonely rancher gave her work when times were hard. She gave him reasons to hope again. And together, they gave the world a story worth remembering, a love worth celebrating, and a legacy that would endure for generations to come.